Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. My name is Robert Carpenter, and I teach genealogy and local history at Gaston College. And I've been involved in family history and local history for now almost 50 years. And I want to present today a little project, a little presentation dealing with genealogy. The Lincoln County Library has asked me to present this, and I hope that you will find it interesting and helpful in your research. The title is Brickwalls, Roadblocks, and Detours. Brickwalls, Roadblocks, and Detours. Now right about here, when I normally present, ask the audience to participate. That's not going to be possible today, and so we're going to move on with that. But all of us, as we've researched, whether it's historical research, genealogical research, has once upon a time hit a brick wall, a roadblock, or a detour. We've had to readjust. We've hit something that we just can't get past, and we're really upset over that. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is some sources and some strategies as how to break through that brick wall, to get through that roadblock, and get past that detour so that you can have success with your research. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is understanding research tools. Various research tools are available for you to use in your research. And they start, basically, what I suggest is their strategies, and they start basically from the home, the community, the county or town, region or state, national records, online, and DNA. And all of these are types of records which you can utilize to find your family history, and you can research local history as well. And I suggest that you start at home, because a lot of folks ignore that. They think they have to go somewhere to find out about their ancestry, when one of the best places, if not the best place, is to start at home, where you're originally at. So these are the things that we're going to talk about. In so doing, what we talk about when I teach my genealogy class at Gaston College, what we're talking about doing is utilizing sources that are reliable. Reliability of sources can vary. The best source that we can use are called primary sources. Primary sources are eyewitness accounts. In other words, contemporary accounts. At this point in the presentation, I would usually ask the audience to give me an example of a primary source. Instead, I'm going to give them to you. Wills, estates, deeds, family Bibles, census records, cemetery records. All of these are examples of primary sources. They are contemporary to the person or to the event that we're talking about. So those are very critical. Now, are they sometimes unreliable? Yes, they are. Sometimes they are unreliable. So we have to measure that. We have to analyze those primary sources and make sure that the primary sources that we are using are best, are most accurate, and are reliable sources. But there are other types of sources that we use in genealogical research, and those being called secondary or derivative sources. And what are they? They are sources that are derived from primary sources. In other words, when I wrote my genealogy book, Carpenters of Plenty, I used primary sources to tell the story of the Carpenter family in the area. And other people use those sources to tell the history of Lincoln County, Sherrill's Annals of Lincoln County, Gaston County's Cope and Wellman's book. And also when I did my Gaston County in the Civil War, I used primary sources to tell the story of the Civil War involving Gaston County and its citizens. Now, does that mean that these sources are unreliable? No. Does it mean that they're not as reliable as primary sources? Yes. The primary benefit of secondary sources is to get a good understanding of the scope and sequence of your research, number one. And number two, though, to seek out the primary sources that author used in creating that book and dealing with that particular research. So strive for primary sources. but use both effectively. And use the gamut of all of these strategies: home, community, county, town, region, state, national, international, and then DNA. And of course, there's so much now online. So that takes us to the genealogical proof standard. A number of years ago, the National Genealogical Society, seeking to try to standardize proof for genealogical records and for analysis of lineage, came up with a standard of proof. And they had 5 tests in this standard. And these need to be met whenever you're doing your research. Number 1, reasonably exhaustive research. Reasonably has always tripped a lot of people. What is reasonable about an exhaustive research project? One of the things that I would suggest would be unreasonable is when you're searching for a person who you knew was living in Gaston County or in Lincoln County, North Carolina in the 1920s, for you to research Massachusetts in 1790. That's unreasonable. That's not but you should exhaustively research material in and around the time period that your ancestor lived. That's part of that reasonably exhaustive research. Number 2, relevant sources cited. I've given you a number of overall sources. Specific sources I will discuss as I go through my case studies. But you need to be sure and cite your sources. If someone, heaven forbid, would ever challenge your conclusions about your ancestor, if you have your sources cited, you simply lay it out there and say, this is what I have, what do you have? And if you have primary sources are reliable, then the other guy is going to walk away disappointed, because your standard of proof is valid and stands forward. So relevant sources cited is absolutely essential. But number 3, taking those sources, we must analyze them. We must analyze the evidence. Again, all sources are not always reliable. And so we must, even primary sources are not reliable. So we've got to analyze the evidence. And then once we analyze the evidence, if we discover there are conflicts in the evidence, we must resolve those conflicts to figure out, okay, what is true. My best example is poor old Daniel Mosteller, who is buried right over there in Long Shoals, and who has 4 birth dates given for him. So that is a conflict of the evidence. And those 4 records, those 4 birth dates come from primary sources, all 4 primary sources. So you must resolve the conflicts. Then finally, once you resolve those conflicts, you make a conclusion from the evidence. The conclusion is not always evident, but the conclusion should flow from the evidence. In other words, you shouldn't approach your project with saying, well, I know my ancestor is named blankety blank, even though you have no clue. You should never proceed in that direction. You should allow your conclusions to flow from the evidence, and that is critical. So each one of your research projects should embody all of the parts of the genealogical proof standard. So what I'm going to do today, in order to demonstrate breaking through brick walls, is I'm going to demonstrate 3 case studies. And so we're going to start with our first case study. Our first case study was a number of years ago now. A guy walked up to me at the Hoyle Historic Homestead open house and said, okay, I want to find my ancestor. And so I quizzed him a little bit, and he began by saying that his grandfather was born in 1898 on his father's side. That was as far back as he could go. Now again, about this time I asked the audience, where would you go? What are some sources you would use? Because that's my next. So what are your thoughts? I want you to think about that as you're listening to me, but I'm going to go ahead and give you the strategies that you should utilize. And these are not all the strategies, there's certainly the other ones, but these are the ones that come to my mind first in utilizing strategies to break down this particular brick wall. So, first of all, family Bible or family sources. My thoughts were that he probably knew there wasn't a family Bible, or they knew there wasn't family records. But don't assume that. What I have discovered is that many folks don't even look for them. They want to find the answer somewhere else. The answer may be lying in a drawer in an old house. It may be in Grandma or Grandpa's old house. And so you've got to search those things first. So a family Bible or other family records is essential in helping to find out who Grandpa's daddy was. The next logical step that all of us researchers go to, if he was born in 1898, is to go to census records. Well, which census would be the most logical census record? 1900 census. In 1900, Grandpa's daddy should be living in the household with his parents, and he should be aged about 1 or 2. Now remember, with census records, while they are a primary source, and they're one of the things that we go to all the time, they also tend to have some unreliability about them. Now remember the process. We just went through a census. The process is for the census taker to come to a house back in this period of time, and for someone, hopefully in the house, to say who lives in the house and give their ages. The informant could be wrong. The informant could have wrong information. It may not be even a person in the house. It may be a neighbor walk by and says, oh, they're gone. They stay gone a lot. I'll tell you who lives there, though. And they list who lives there. And they give the ages based on what they know. So there's a possibility there for an error. Then there's a possibility of when that enumerator writes this information down, that he transcribes it incorrectly, leaves information down. So keep that in mind as you're using census records, but they're an invaluable source. And that's the first place that I would work if I did not have access to the home to look for a family Bible or family records. But don't stop at the 1900 census. Keep going. You know, census was done every 10 years in America. Go every 10 years, and what you can find, hopefully, was you find a picture of him every 10 years, Grandpa, and he should be getting 10 years older. Again, that might be one of those conflicts that you discover, that there's some problems with his age, and I've found that oftentimes. So those are two very good types of records. The third one I want to discuss is a death certificate. Death certificates started in North Carolina on a systematic basis around 1915. And so there were some earlier, but they were not required by law. But even being required by law, not all of them were done in 1915 and afterwards. However, go search that death certificate. On the death certificate, you have the person's parents being listed. But again, the key thing to look there on that death certificate is the informant. Who gave the information? Well, Grandpa did not give that information because he was deceased. So who gave that information to the department, to the county records office? So looking at that death certificate, that really can help break down who Grandpa's mom and daddy was. I'll give you an example. I was just looking at my grandfather's death certificate the other day, and his wife, my grandmother, gave his father's name incorrectly. So it happens. So keep that in mind, but that is a very critical source. Marriage license. Whenever Grandpa got married, on the form it has a place for father and mother. Again, this would be a little more reliable than the death certificate because he is giving that information on the marriage license. This is my daddy's name, this is my mama's name. So a marriage license is another good source for determining the parentage of Grandpa, who was born in 1898. Church records. Finding church records can be very difficult, it can be confusing, but it's also an excellent source. And it's a community source. Go to the nearest churches and ask if they have records. Ask the family, where they go to church. Baptismal records, membership records, marriage records, burial records, all of those things can be very, very valuable in your search, and they can prove who Grandpa's daddy was. Newspaper accounts. We're very, very fortunate now. And when I started doing genealogy, newspaper was very difficult to access because it just weren't available. Now there's so much online with newspapers.com, which is a paid site, and Chronicling America, which is a free site, where you can access newspaper accounts and you can Google the name and hopefully it'll be accurately indexed and you can discover who information about them and about anything that he may have done during that period of time. Where is he buried? Find a Grave is another online source that can help you determine where he's buried. It oftentimes gives you a picture of the grave, the tombstone, and so it gives you a very good source for his burial record. Finally, the other source that I would suggest to that gentleman would be DNA. DNA is not nearly as important as all of these other sources. Why? Because these other sources, based upon his date of when his grandpa lived, are more contemporary. DNA is the major source that absolutely proves the biological relationship. However, DNA doesn't solve everything, and we're going to talk about that a little later on. So that's our first case study. So remember, we went through the process, an extensive research. We went through looking at sources, various sources. We talked about analyzing those sources. We talked about resolving conflicts during those sources and when they may not be reliable, and then drawing a conclusion based upon the evidence that is presented. So let's look at our second case study. Our second case study is personal to me. An oral tradition was that my ancestor, Peter Carpenter, he was a German, Zimmerman, was in the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill. And where are my sources for that? Well, the descendant in 1926 wrote a newspaper article where he said during the war he, Peter Carpenter, was wounded at the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill. Now, was that descendant a primary source? In 1926, did he witness that wound of his grandfather back in 1780? I don't think so. He didn't live that long. So you see, he's not a primary source. That doesn't mean that we dismiss this source. It's been in the family, an oral tradition in our family for years and years, and he just put it in the newspaper there. So keep in mind that this is a very important source, but we want to check the reliability of that source. Other sources also indicated that he was wounded in the battle. A book written by Ian M.L. Deppen in 1940, Counting Kindred, also restated that story and gave some specifics about him walking home from the battle and collapsing on the side of the Indian Creek from his wounds, and that he was carried to the house and he was taken care of, and it even described the wounds. So, where do I go for contemporary documents, for eyewitness sources, to validate this oral tradition that we have that's been passed down? So, the one thing that the descendant failed to tell the readers in that newspaper article was that our ancestor was a Tory. He was a loyalist. He fought for the British at the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill. Now, whether he was embarrassed about it, he didn't figure it was anybody's business or whatever, but that was part of the tradition that I'd always heard, that he fought for the British at the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill. So I immediately checked the North Carolina archives for confiscation documents. You see, during the war, times were so difficult that the General Assembly of North Carolina, and frankly all the other of the 13 original colonies, passed laws which said that if you were a loyalist, a Tory, supporting the British, that you could have your property confiscated. And they laid out procedures for doing that. It could take land, it could take movable property, etc. So, at the archives, there are filed confiscation documents, and one is dated September the 19th, 1782, and it's a list of persons who were to come under the confiscation law, and it specifically listed Peter Carpenter as one of those people. Then later on, I discovered in the October sessions of 1783, Lincoln County Court of Pleas and Quarter Sessions, Peter Carpenter had 520 pounds of beef. That's a couple calves, couple cows, confiscated, worth $28.34. So from that document, we see that something was going on here. That he was apparently a Tory, a loyalist, that he was called under the law and they actually had property confiscated. Does that answer our genealogical question? That he was in the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill and that he was wounded? No, it doesn't. But it gets us a little closer, doesn't it? Okay, so where is the documentation? Well, I've been working on this family and these records for a very long time, and I've searched in vain for a contemporary document mentioning his involvement in the battle and that he was wounded. And then, when I was at the archives recently, a genealogical friend, Miles Philback, located a document filed under Salisbury District Superior Court, Criminal Action Papers, CRX Box 76. Please note, in the last 2 slides, I documented my sources. Be sure and document your sources as you're going along, because you don't want to have to go back and find it again. It's always harder to find it the second time around. And here is the document. Now, you probably can't read that, which is fine because I transcribed it for you. And here it is. The state versus Peter Carpenter, Andrew Betts and Louis Beard stood his bond, which is recognizance. And what was he being tried for? Treason. Now, who was trying him for treason? The Patriot government of North Carolina. So you had 2 competing governments here in a sense. You had the British government and you had the American government, the patriotic. Look at the date, 24th July, 1780. Peter Carpenter was bound at 5,000 pounds. And each of those guys put up half of that as security. The condition was that he make an appearance at the next Superior Court, held on the 15th of September, next to answer a charge of being in the Tory camp at South Fort Catawba and acknowledge himself of being wounded and in the battle. I wish they'd said more about and etc. And not depart the court without leave. And Matthew Troy was the one who wrote that recognizance bond. So all of a sudden, we go from not knowing to now having a document that is very specific. So we know that the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill occurred on the 20th of June, 1780. The document was dated 24th of July, 1780, so it's not long afterward. And it refers to the geographic location. South Fork, Catawba River, Ramsauer's Mill is on Clark's Creek, less than a quarter mile, half a mile from intersection with the river in Lincolnton. Today Lincolnton, that time it wasn't. It critically states also that he was wounded. So he had to be in a battle. He was in the Tory camp, it said. So he was in a battle, Tory camp. So what does this tell us? It tells us, as we research, don't give up. Continue looking. Continue searching. Because oftentimes we find it in unlikely places. Now, what was the document? Where did it come from? It came from Rowan County, Salisbury Superior Court records. Well, Salisbury Superior Court records? Well, at the time of the Revolution, Salisbury had the Superior Court, which dealt with what was then Lincoln County. It's something that I had forgotten over the years. I had searched the Lincoln County records for information about this, but it really didn't dawn on me that it might have been in the Salisbury records. So, help others so that they might help you. Collaborate. Share your genealogy. I just walked up at the archives and Miles says, I've got something I think you might be interested in. And he had already pulled the document up, went to him, there it was, got a copy, bingo, you saw it. So, our conclusion on this research case study. The evidence was found at Salisbury District Superior Court, Criminal Action Papers, CRX, Box 76, and it proves that he was a Tory at the Battle of Ramsauer's Mill, was wounded in the battle. He faced criminal consequences for his action, and this evidence correlates with his property confiscation, his loss of his beef cattle, located in other documents. So it brings it all together, and so it once again proves from primary source material that my ancestor was wounded at the Battle of Ramsayer's Mill, even if he was on the other side. So our third case study involves a little more complex research strategy and research problem that we're going to talk about. So I'm going to start with my wife's family. There was rumor in her family that her ancestor Nathan McGinnis, who was born about 1831, was illegitimate. The family would not talk to her about it. They didn't want to talk to her about it. So, many years ago, a former barber was also a descendant of Nathan McGinnis, and he told me that Nathan was illegitimate and that he had step siblings with the last name of Aker, E-A-K-E-R, which is a very popular name in western Lincoln County and also in and around the Cherryville area. Okay, so what are our first steps to solve this brick wall? Again, a normal presentation, I would be asking the audience what their ideas were. So let's look at some strategies. Our initial strategies. Our initial strategies would be census records. If he was born about 1831, in 1850 he should be living with his mama and daddy, or a mama or a daddy. So that's the first one we want to check. Why 1850? 1850 was the first census where individual people were listed by age. Prior to that time, it was only the head of the household, and they were listed in age categories. So that is the first initial strategy that we want to utilize, is to use census records starting in 1850, but again, going every 10 years, looking for him. Secondly, there are such a thing as bastardy bonds, which are located at the archives in Raleigh. The law at that time said that in order to keep the county free from keeping up, illegitimate children who had no support, no man, if you would, to support them at that time, that they would require the father of the child to post bond and to maintain that child. And that was the law of the land. And it was a criminal law. So they would literally take that person to court through the whole process. It started out with a bastardy bond. He had to take out a bastardy bond to say that he would do his job and he would live through the consequences of the court proceedings. The other places that you look in association with this whole legal process is court minutes and dockets. You see, if it ended up in a court case, a criminal court case, which it very well could have, you will have court minutes and you'll have dockets, which will give you information about the case. Finally, it also could find criminal action papers, which are those papers which are critical to understanding the whole process that occurred during this time when this man was being prosecuted for having an illegitimate child. And I might also say that they could also take the case out against the mother of the child if she refused to give the name of the father. And I've seen those cases as well where that has occurred. So we have criminal action papers, we have bastardy bond, all that is archival research. Another strategy, land deeds. It's possible that Nathan McGinnis received land from a father, from a mother, from a stepfather, from a stepmother, from an uncle, from an aunt, and it would state so in the deed. And so land deeds are a critical source in determining who the parents of Nathan McGinnis were. Finally, DNA. One of the best sources for illegitimacy is DNA. And we'll talk about that just a little later on. So, let's go back. What do we know? We know Nathan McGinnis was born about 1831. He died the 6th of October, 1908. He married Susan Baker. You see her dates, 1838 to 1925. Both are buried at St. John's Lutheran Church in Cherryville. They had a large family near Cherryville per descendants and census records. No documentation has proven that Nathan was the son of any other McGinnis in the area per wills or estate papers or census records or any other records. even though two early McGinnis families did reside in the area in and around Cherryville in the early 1800s. So you see, we know that there's a lot that we don't know. And so let's go back to our original research strategies. Let's go to census. So I located Nathan, age 19, Nathan McGinnis, in the 1850 Gaston census. There's the house number so that you can go back and check it for yourself. It's in the household of a man by the name of William McGinnis. He was interestingly listed last, even though he was the eldest in the family. Is that a clue? Could be a clue, but we can't draw conclusions from that. We file that as, oh, that could be a clue. Well, here's your picture. There's Nathan, 19. There's William. There's Catherine, his wife. And here's the other members of the family listed in the census. And so, you know, we see that. We see him down here, and we're going, I wonder if something's up with that. But we don't know that yet. But we take that into advisement. So, but you don't stop looking. The area around Cherryville is in the northwestern corner of Gaston County, which means you have two other counties located nearby, Lincoln and Cleveland. And so I'll check Lincoln County Census, and I check Cleveland County Census. In Cleveland County, I located a man by the name of Nathan Aker in 1850, was age 18. Now remember, ages in census can be varied. He was in the household of a man by the name of Peter Aker and a wife, Mary Ann, and I located their marriage record, which was in 1836, Lincoln County Bonds. Now remember, 1836, Nathan was older than the marriage bond. That throws up a red flag that says that something's going on here. Note the different county. Does that create a problem? Well, no. If you study it again, a little geography, you know that Cleveland County and Gaston County are right side by side, that area of Cherryville. And in fact, the two residences that we're talking about were probably only about a mile apart. So here's the 1850 record of this particular family. So you have Peter, you have Mary Ann, that's Mary A., you have Nathan Aker, age 18, and then you have Alfred, and then you have John. Now what's critical here is that Alfred and John were born after Peter and Mary Ann got married. Nathan was born before they got married. So that tells us something's going on, but let's analyze it a little further and try to resolve these conflicts. So there's documentation that he married Susan Baker probably after his return from the Civil War, even though no marriage record has been located for them. So we have a Nathan McGinnis and a Nathan Aker in the 1850 census, different households, different counties, age 18 and 19. Our research has indicated that no Nathan Aker appears in the record after this 1850 census record. My research, Lorena Aker's research, and she printed 2 volumes of The Shoe Cobbler's Kin, cannot find that Nathan Aker anywhere else. The oral tradition that a McGinnis man had a child with a lady who later married an Aker becomes an important source. You see, it comes together here. You're getting this information, and you're not making those conclusions until you see how he's listed as both a McGinnis and an Aker. Sometime after the 1850 census, Catherine Carpenter McGinnis, the wife of William McGinnis, died. And William and some members of his family moved to Calhoun County, Alabama. So he went down there. So I checked the records down there. No Nathan McGinnis down there. No Nathan Aker down there. Even though a number of other people from this particular area of Gaston and Lincoln County did move into that area of Alabama. Again, we know that Peter Aker married Mary Ann Warlick in 1936, and that he and she continued in the area after the 1850 census, and we can find information about them. So, I'm going to do that. We have candidates for Nathan's parents, William McGinnis and Mary Ann Warlick, who later married Peter Aker. Have we proven at this point that Nathan McGinnis' parents were William McGinnis and Mary Ann Warlick? Well, the answer is probably not yet. No. We've got a lot of other research that we need to do. Remember, all of our research strategies, basically the only thing that we've done here is census. So let's look at what that other result says. So I went through the Bastardy bonds at the archives for Lincoln County, which was in the area where he, when he was born, that would have been the administrative area known as Lincoln County. None. I couldn't find anything. Then I looked through the court minutes, criminal action papers, court dockets, found nothing. After looking through the apprentice records, same result. The point I'd like to make is that none of these records are indexed. So y'all, you're going to have to get out and leaf through papers and look through papers looking for specific things. Then I checked land deeds, Gaston, Lincoln, Cleveland County. Again, nothing could be found to prove the parentage of Nathan McGinnis. Again, no marriage record has existed, and Nathan has not been located in the 1860 census. So we don't really know where he was unless he was skipped at that time. So we've gone through all of our listed strategies except one, and that is DNA. DNA results. My wife had tested with Ancestry.com, and she matches at least 2 descendants of William McGinnis through his wife, Catherine Carpenter. Okay? She also matches a number of people through Nathan McGinnis and Susan Baker. So we have that proving biologically that she is related to William McGinnis through her DNA. Here are my sources. Now, at this point in my presentation with this, I always stop and say, have I proven that Nathan McGinnis is the son of William McGinnis and Mary Ann Warlick? And a lot of folks in the audience will say, no, you haven't proven it. You have not found a document. And they're right. There's not one document that proves it. There's not one document that shows it. However, have I proven that that is a logical and a reasonable conclusion from the evidence? Okay, most folks would say, well, yeah. Then the next question I ask the audience is, what conflicting information have I discovered? And the answer is none. You don't have any. You don't have anybody jumping out and saying, oh, no. The ancestor is this guy over here, and here why. You don't have that. Why not? And again, as we go through this process, you can't always find that silver bullet that you're looking for that proves definitively your particular family. But what you do have in this particular situation is you have all of this data. It's been a reasonable, exhaustive search. The information has been reliably analyzed, compared. There's no other conclusion that we have found. Now, does that not mean that that doesn't mean in another month or two somebody will walk up and say, hey, look, I got a Bible record for Nathan McGinnis, and that's not his daddy. No, that's a possibility. But at this point in time, with the research we've done, the final analysis is Nathan McGinnis was the son of William McGinnis and Mary Ann Warlick, and Mary Ann Warlick later married Peter Aker, and that he was illegitimate. These are the sources that I used. Remember, you always want to validate and show your sources. So, let's talk about breaking down that brick wall. Learn research techniques. Attend workshops, wikis, read books, learn by doing, join societies, network. Learn about the sources. Some sources solve certain problems better than other sources, and I think I've explained some of those in the 3 case studies we talked about. Analyze and think outside the box. Don't assume that people are going to do what you would do today. Assume that people would do what they would do at that point in time. Try to think like your ancestor. Be a detective. Collaborate. Post queries for genealogical societies or online. Work with others. Share your research with the hope that they, if they find something helpful, may also share research with you. And also strive always to locate those eyewitness sources. Some hints in your search. Spelling. No standard spelling for anything. Anybody's name, first or last, so be open to phonetic spelling. So if you see a name and you can't figure out what it was, spell it phonetically, like each letter. Logically follow the research strategies which most likely fit. Don't look in Massachusetts in colonial days for somebody that you're trying to research in the early 1920s. Change your strategies based on the results. If you find results you didn't expect, change strategies and move in a different direction. Join genealogical societies, attend seminars and workshops, podcasts, which I guess is what we're doing right now, is a podcast. Watch television genealogy shows. You can get so much from that. And facilitate a cadre of researchers around you and with you who are interested in solving those problems. And finally, be cautious. I hate to tell you this, but do not believe everything you read online, especially those doggone trees that are posted. And I don't care how good they are. Read them, but don't just believe them. Read them and then learn and try to figure out what the truth is, because the truth may be there or the truth may be something different. Be cautious. DNA is a tool. It's not always the solution. DNA can never tell you the exact name of the person. In most cases, now you get these genetic detectives who can, and they're so good at it, they maybe can tell you the exact person. But for our research, I want you to keep in mind that you can never really know exactly the person. You know a family, and you know a range of people. So it's a tool. Use other things to help you. Use a timeline, charts and graphs. Do anything that will help visualize or internalize your research. And follow your ancestor through the years. Learn about him, her, through the years from various sundry sources. And remember to have as many sources as possible. DNA. Most effective use of DNA, number one, is adoption. There's no question that many adoptions have been solved through DNA. Bastardly unknown parentage. DNA will solve that from a biological standpoint. It will not solve and give you the name of that person. It will tell you, in many cases, who or which family they came from. It will confirm a family relationship. Let's say, well, I always knew that I was related to this particular person, or I always thought I was. DNA will prove whether you are or not. It will trace the male ancestor. If you do the Y-DNA test, it's patrilineal. It will trace your male ancestor all the way back, and so that you can learn exactly the family that you're descended from and who those people are. The other real benefit, especially of autosomal DNA, is that you locate other family members, you locate cousins, you can locate other people, and you can learn from them. You share with them, they share with you. So, in all your research, whatever you do, you can break through that brick wall and you can solve those genealogical problems. I would be happy if you, I hope that you have found this helpful, useful. I'd be happy for any of you who would like to take my genealogy classes at Gaston College to sign up and do so. We have a great time. We learn a lot. Thank you very much, and good luck in all of your searchings.